Hello and welcome to this month's edition of the Whisky Investment Podcast by VCL Vintners. I'm Alwynne Gwilt, whisky journalist, and this month I'm joined by Tommy Major, who's the head cask broker here at VCL. We're going to be going behind the scenes and delving into the world of cask management, buying, selling, really what all of that means for not only Tommy's role, but the investor at the end of the day. Tommy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
For those out there who maybe haven't had a chance to hear about what you do before, can you give a little insight into the day-to-day of what being head cask broker is like here at VCL?
Yeah, so on a day-to-day basis, the majority of my time I spend speaking to clients. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, but ultimately my job is to unlock value. Unlock value within this industry for the investor. Yeah. And it's about timing, right? It's about timing, it's about brands, it's about making sure that we're looking at the right liquid at the right time. So in 5 to 10 years, that's the liquid that everyone's fighting for.
And I guess that's kind of exciting, but also lends its own challenges along the way. So you've been with the company for the last 4 years, since 2022. How has the market shifted in that time? It's been quite a dynamic period of time in the whiskey industry, hasn't it?
Very dynamic, and I think the market's matured a lot in that time. Yeah. I think the way in which investors are buying has slightly changed. I think they're certainly looking at bigger brands, kind of looking at stronger casks, because ultimately, you know, what we're trying to achieve is buy something that's going to have continuous demand. So throughout the marketplace, that will have fluctuations in terms of consumption. When you start talking about rare casks, there's always a certain demand for them. Even in a marketplace where there can be a lot of liquid available, there may only be very limited availability in certain areas. And of course, dynamics change in terms of where whiskey is being purchased, the types of people that are drinking whiskey. And our job as a company and myself as an individual is to kind of stay on top of those trends. What you kind of lose in one place, you tend to pick up somewhere else. If you're buying young liquid, it can be a little bit more challenging. Hence the reason why as a company we deal with very limited amounts of casks from distilleries at a young age. We tend to try to focus on aged liquid more so because you just can't replace that liquid.
Absolutely.
So I think there's been a reset in a sense in how distilleries are releasing their stock and the marketplace as a whole in how people are investing. But I think that's kind of laid a really strong foundation for the years to come to move forward. I think markets go through cycles, and I think there was a lot of people out there buying and just hoping that whatever they would buy would make them money.
Increase,
and you know, that's outside of VCL Vintners, right? The whiskey market was performing so well.
Secondary market, cask
right.
Whatever
just whatever I buy, it's going to make money. It's going to make money. And I think from our advice, people have become a lot more selective now, and we've of course had to become more selective too. So it's about kind of making sure that you're picking the right stock at the right time for the right client, based on their whole time and the amount they can invest, which will then hopefully put them in a strong position in years to come. We're not focusing just on today. Remember, if you're investing into whiskey, you're looking at, you know, we try to advise a long-term hold. So you're looking at where it's going to be in 5 to 10 years' time. And if you buy the right cask, I certainly think there's value there.
It's almost like putting puzzle pieces together, like kind of saying like, oh, I can see there's this possibility here, but it's also still predicting based on a lot of other things. I mean, recently there has been a lot of, I feel like it's been more than ever. Maybe it's just because there's so many headlines, but a lot of geopolitical uncertainty right now. How is that affecting cask management from your perspective?
Good question. I mean, interestingly, I think it reinforces the appeal in this industry. I think as a long-term investment, I think you see, so when you've got so much to think about outside, you know, of your own little world and trying to manage your funds and do the best you can by your family and hold on to as much of it as you possibly can and make some along the way if possible. I think whiskey is a really appealing asset. And if I look at kind of past performance in these kind of times, then whiskey tends to be a really attractive area. And the reason for that, people turn and look at tangible assets. I mean, if you've got a tangible commodity that's tradable in any aspect of life, that's really warming to know, right? You know, no matter what happens outside, there's always going to be a value on a cask of whiskey.
Yeah.
So you're not going to wake up tomorrow and your whiskey's not worth anything. Okay, right? You know, if the whole world turns their nose up at whiskey, it's a slightly different conversation that we're having.
A lot of people globally,
right? Right? So, you know, and even then, you know, I have clients question me about the kind of changes in consumption and, you know, about the young population now that are super fit, and you know, we've got a bunch of different people doing different things that are all really health conscious. Yeah. And a funny thing is, you know, we had we had a Burns night not too long ago, and there was several really young people.
Yeah, absolutely. Very dynamic crowd.
And they were really, really interesting to speak to, because it gives you an insight into the kind of the youth, if you want to call it the youth, because they seem very young, in their early 20s, that are gathering in groups to drink whiskey. Yeah. So that's another thing. I think the market is growing, and I think, you know, if you look at the kind of individuals that are drinking whiskey globally and the kind of ages, you know, it's not just the old guy in
it's not dying out anymore. Especially depending on the market, isn't it?
But I've kind of gone off the question slightly there, because I thought that was quite interesting. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, look, when you're looking at taxes, it's a huge thing at the moment. We're just not sure where we're heading. A lot of people are concerned. I mean, I speak to a lot of people on the telephone, and that's probably one of their main concerns. One of the greatest kind of draws to whiskey investments is the tax efficiency. Yeah. So, you know, to answer your question, I think it's good, and history tends to show that it's a positive time for cask investors. Now, of course, along with that, there takes a team of people like VCL Vintners to be able to select the right casks, position them for you.
It's not an automatic. It's a lot of planning and strategy.
Of course. But from an investment perspective, I would say inflows increase as volatility rises in external markets. Yeah. Because it's quite simple, you know, and sometimes I can think it sounds too simple, you know, and you explain it to a client, and you might be speaking to someone that's new in the market, you may be speaking to someone that's been in the market for 10 years, and yet you still kind of go back to the same areas, you know. A 15-year-old generally costs more than a 10-year-old. Yes. You know, not always, but most of the time. But
generally, there's kind of a specific...
There's this consistent movement in price point over time. Yeah. And as long as we can guide our clients in the right direction and kind of give them the information they need to look at this as a long-term hold and to be patient, right? This market requires patience. Yeah. Then I think it's certainly one of the pool areas in terms of, right, what do we do in times of political crisis? You know, it's like, where do we put our money? Because that's what, you know, once a year, twice a year, how often do you look at your investments, you know, and think, right, what do I do? And a lot of the time that's ignited by what's going on globally, externally, right? Yes, you know, you could be sitting at home very comfortable, and all of a sudden something appears on the news, and the next thing you're thinking, what next?
I think a lot of people are thinking that right now.
You start to look for areas, or you start to look at what you've got, and it's not performing quite as well, or you start to be concerned about the potential future implications of tax and what could happen globally, trade deals and so on and so on. Yeah. And you start to look for something, okay, this is tangible, it's not moving, you know, it sits in one place. It's going to be there day in, day night, you know, daily. And as long as it's kind of managed correctly, time will generally look after you. So that was kind of a long answer to your short question, but we could talk about that all day long.
Absolutely.
Because there's so many different areas.
And so many moving parts of that. And you mentioned just then about trade deals, and I think that's been on everybody's minds recently. We've seen a couple of very historic trade deals being signed with India and with China across the UK and the EU. Are you seeing those as bright lights for the whiskey industry and for investors?
100%. I mean, if you've got a trade tariff that is being reduced, that's great. If you've got a trade tariff that's being reduced in a nation that consume whiskey beyond any other nation globally, that's even better. So, you know, we can talk about India and say, to a lot of people, it's unknown that whiskey consumption is at such a high level, albeit in volume. But when you're sitting on a 150% tariff, it massively reduces your access to any marketplace. You know, if we take whiskey out of the question here, if there's a 150% tariff on any product, luxury product or not, it's going to impact the amount of that product you buy. And the volume of which purchasing. So I think it's fantastic. I think it's something that has a lag effect. I don't think it's something that's going to have, you know, there are a certain amount of people that expected this overnight boom. And I was not one of those people. I certainly think it's something that's going to slowly creep into the market. Forecasts are for a further £1 billion to enter the Scotch whisky sector from India alone.
From India alone, which we haven't even seen the impact yet of China and that latest.
We're not even at that point yet. So, you know, it was the 10% reduction down to 5% in China. I mean, I think China's an interesting place because, in my opinion, that small increment, 10% down to 5%, could cause a real surge in buying. I think when you look at the Chinese buyer, I mean, I'm no expert, right? But, you know, I do a lot of research and I speak to a lot of individuals that work within the sector. And when they buy, they tend to buy in a pretty big way. And it comes in waves. So I think it just adds to the cycle. I think we do work in cycles in this industry. And there are times where you just can't get your hands on whiskey. You can't get what you need. It's a really difficult place to, you know, to be able to provide the clients with what they need, and it makes our job a little bit more difficult. And there's times like now where there's more liquid available, but that can change so quick. That can change so quick, and we've seen it happen, right? You've probably witnessed it in the past, where it's like, you know, you can walk into any shop and you can buy pretty much whatever you need, and within 12 months it's like,
oh, now it's suddenly not on the market anymore because there's been such a big demand. And and the problem with whiskey, I think, and we often see, just from, I guess, from a direct to consumer perspective, maybe less in the cask, is those bottles, if they're on bottles on shelf, it takes 12, 15 years to get to the consumer. So you can't just remake it magically. And it's the same as you say with casks. You can't just magically create a new 30-year-old whiskey. You have to wait. Time is your friend, as you said. So with those dynamics shifting quite a lot, where are you seeing, I guess, more opportunities?
I think this is part of a cycle, okay? So there was certainly a sense of an overproduction in terms of liquid from distilleries. But overproduction of what, right? So of what liquid are we talking about? We're talking about young liquid. We have to look in cycles. So as previously mentioned, we're looking at 5, 10, 15 years. What you're also seeing is distilleries are either easing off on production, in some senses not producing at all. So the distilleries are being very proactive, which for me creates a really healthy marketplace because they're looking at where we're going to be in 5, 10 years time, okay? And they're trying to control the market in that sense. So what would you want as a distillery? If you're a distillery owner, where would you want the market to be in 5 to 10 years time? Would you want prices higher or would you want them to stabilize at the point they're at today? You know, the easy answer is they would love them to be higher, right? How do you create that? How do you create higher price points from strong brands within this industry? Is you limit production.
Limit demand, yes.
Okay.
Limit production.
So as much as you can say there's liquid available in the market at the moment, I mean, there's more young liquid available.
Right.
But is there more 10-year-olds?
Right, yeah.
Are there more 25-year-olds? You know, from our experience, no. There's not. Why? Because as you said,
they weren't thinking about that.
You can't go back and produce the 10-year-olds to 15 to 25.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's a good opportunity? What looks like a slight overproduction today can actually be a really good opportunity to buy liquid. At a young age.
Right. So you're getting in there early, knowing that 10 years down the line, there'll be less. They're slowing down now.
Exactly. Well, if you look at some of the distilleries that were releasing 10 years ago, Young Spirit, and it was quite accessible, some of those distilleries, it's really difficult, if not impossible, to obtain liquid from today.
Yeah.
And we're talking young spirit. So the only access you have is to aged casks. So, I think as much as the market has a cycle, I think distilleries do too.
Yeah.
In that sense. And I think they have a way in which they can control that cycle to some extent.
Yeah.
You of course you cannot control how many people pick up a bottle of whiskey from the shelf. Yeah, they've got huge marketing budgets, and they're driving the market forward in Asia. And I think if you look at the premium side of the market, to kind of go back slightly, and you look at China and you look at Southeast Asia in general, the premium side of the market, I think, is growing.
Yes.
So I think if you're in a position where you're holding a really rare cask at the premium end of the market, in my opinion, at the moment, you're in a really strong position.
Yeah, because there will be a buyer for that.
You're not talking about young liquid that's working from trade to trade or sitting in an investor's portfolio.
Yeah, it's about rebalancing shifts.
It is about rebalancing.
I think that point is really important, is that the decisions of the distilleries on the ground can have that long-term impact on the buyer, the investor, whoever is at the back end of the market after those decisions are being made. You mentioned a couple of distilleries stopping production. We've obviously spoken previously on the podcast about Jim Beam, and that is obviously a very big decision from their side to halt production for the time being. Do you see America as a place to even look at casks or investment, because it's quite a roller coaster time over there right now? Is it too volatile?
When you say investment from our perspective, so money coming in from the US, or from a consumption point of view?
Yeah, both. So either purchasing American whiskey casks or investors looking at actually...
I mean, the US is 100%, it's one of the most sophisticated markets in the world, right, for whiskey. So, Trump comes in, he puts a 10% tariff, on Scotch, and all of a sudden it's like, well, what... Some people start to think, hold on. I think in the US there will always be a base level where the consumer demand, is strong. It will fluctuate. Does that concern us? No. If you kind of look at how that's being balanced, then you look at the trade tariffs we've just spoken about, and so we've got 10% that's, been pushed by Trump, which is a difficult one. But then we've seen a 75% reduction in India, which are the largest consumer by volume. You would expect to see huge amounts of growth in that sector over a 5 to 10 year period based on that. If you look at China, that are trying to help the Scotch industry, they're reducing tariffs. If you look at Southeast Asia in general, it's it is the fastest growing sector for Scotch whisky. So, what do we look at here? Do we look at the positives, or do we kind of focus on the potential negatives that are there in the US? And, my opinion is on the US that it will always come strong.
Yeah, I guess that at the end of the day, as you say, there's so much love for the heritage and history of Scotch, and the tariffs, whatever they are at the point in time, may change in the next...
And it's not always controlled by the consumer, right?
Yeah.
You have to remember that. So when you see a tariff in place, it's not always controlled by the consumer as to what they have access to at that point. So in terms, you may see a drop in consumption in the US. Is that because there's no consumer demand, or is that because
they just can't get a hold of it?
Because the exporters and the suppliers of that liquid have kind of taken a stance that we're going to hold off. We're going to see if there's an agreement between the UK and the US to reduce that 10%. And until that happens, we're going to kind of slow up what we're actually doing in terms of Scotch and try and replace that with other areas. So I don't think that a 10% tariff would affect the consumer demand. That's my opinion. It wouldn't affect me. I don't know if it would affect you. If something increased in price by 10%.
Well, I mean, everything feels like it's increasing by 10%.
Right,
All consumables.
So we talk about inflation in general. So
continuous shifts, rebalancing, finding new opportunities. I mean, you've mentioned Southeast Asia a lot, and I agree. I've been out there a lot, and I think from even 10 years ago, the consumer profile drinking whiskey was fascinating. When I'm being in South Korea and being like, why is everybody 22 and drinking bottles of whiskey? Like, this is amazing. I love this place. I love Japan. These places where people get it, and they get the heritage, and they get the quality, is that, so I've been excited about that market for a while, but I think it's really starting to come to pass in terms of the volume, in terms of the numbers. Would you say in 2026 that's an area you're most excited about, or are there opportunities in other places like Africa or South America, or from a
there's opportunities in many areas at the moment, but without a doubt Southeast Asia is one of the areas that I'm most excited about. I think there's the consumer is very educated and becoming more educated, which plays into our hands as an investment company, because it means that they're looking for a certain product, and there's specifics attached sometimes to what they're consuming, the history, the heritage, you know, and this is what it's about, right? This is what being involved in such an amazing product that expands globally is about. It's about seeing new people enter the market with passion and looking for unique opportunities. And that, whether that be buying a cask as an investment or buying a bottle to consume. This is what the interesting thing is, right? So we've got marketplaces that are growing quite significantly. I mean, if you look at Vietnam, for instance, right? It was, I think at the back end of last year, it was registered as the fastest growing whiskey market in the world.
I'm not surprised. I was out there last year, and the whole middle class is just completely changing.
I think it's at like 27% a year growth.
Huge.
So and there's wealth there, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And
huge growing middle class.
And as the education continues to grow, you have to remember what we do as a company. We target specific brands for those reasons. So going back to clients and my job and our job as a company, it's about sourcing specific brands, certain age statements, with the eyesight of that's going to be a cask in 5 to 10 years' time. There's going to be a buyer for it. Why? Because it's going to excel in maybe this market, or it could be on the other side of the globe, you know? So I think it's a really interesting thing to talk about, and all the help we can get, you know.
Well, Tommy, what's been fantastic today is I feel like so much of the world and the news and everything is doom and gloom, and it's been lovely speaking to you today and saying that it's not. There's lots of positivity, there's opportunity, and it's still an exciting, dynamic time in the whiskey industry today. So thank you, Tommy. I'm looking forward to seeing what 2026 brings, and I'm sure you are as well.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
Amazing. Thanks for joining us today on the podcast.